Have you ever wondered why shame clings to the heart like a shadow that refuses to leave, even when no crime has been committed? A child sits in the corner of a room filled with voices that speak over her, eyes that slide past her, hands that never quite reach to pull her close. The room is not violent, but it is cold, and that coldness sinks deeper than bruises ever could. The message is silent but unmistakable. You are unseen. And in the absence of recognition, the soul draws its own conclusion. That being invisible must mean being unworthy. Shame is not born from wickedness. It is born from neglect, from being overlooked in the hour when acknowledgement would have been life itself. Like a vine searching for sunlight, the psyche twists inward when no one affirms its place in the world. A woman may grow into her power, yet still carry the old whisper that she is somehow wrong, somehow defective, simply because her essence was not met with witness. The shame then masquerades as character, as if it defines her very nature. But in truth, shame is an echo, not an essence. The echo begins in the earliest years, when the archetypal child needed the gaze of the tribe, the warmth of belonging, and instead found a void. This is why shame feels so primal. It is the wound of being exiled from recognition, of being denied the mirror that tells you that you exist. And so, the ego interprets absence as condemnation, a verdict it carries into every relationship. You may notice how the woman apologizes before speaking, how she lowers her voice when desiring, how she doubts the gift of her own presence. In Jungian terms, the shadow is not just what we repress because it is unacceptable, but also what was never reflected back to us as acceptable in the first place. Shame wraps around these hidden parts, convincing us they are poisonous when in fact they are only unloved. A man may see confidence in her, and still she will feel fraudulent. Friends may praise her, yet the words vanish before reaching her core. Shame functions as a filter, erasing every piece of evidence that might contradict its ancient script. Consider how powerful that filter is. It can turn silence into accusation, a pause into rejection, a neutral face into scorn. This is why shame cannot be reasoned with on the surface level. It is not a thought, it is a body memory, a pattern carried in the nervous system. The Stoics taught that suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the judgments we attach to them. Yet when the judgment has been fused into identity, it feels inseparable from who we are. Shame tells the woman, "You are not overlooked, you are unworthy," and that lie becomes the lens through which she reads every gesture. Imagine the difference if, instead of invisibility, the child had been met with recognition. A simple gaze of delight, a voice that said, "I see you, you belong here." The nervous system would have recorded safety, not shame. But many did not receive this, and so they walk as adults with the archetypal wound of invisibility. The good news is that this wound, though ancient, is not final. The psyche is not a static script, it is alchemical. What has been blackened can be illuminated, what has been hidden can be integrated. Shame does not have to define the future, though it will try. When the woman begins to notice the pattern, how every silence feels like rejection, how every mistake feels like proof of defectiveness, she stands at a threshold. That threshold is the point of individuation, the path Jung described where the unconscious reveals itself in symbols, in projections, in emotional storms. To walk through it requires courage, because confronting shame means questioning the verdict your ego has carried for decades. Yet it is only by questioning that the verdict loses its power. So the question rises like a flame. What if shame was never proof of badness at all, but only a sign that your light went unseen? If that were true, what hidden parts of you might finally be allowed to step into the open? Shame behaves like a ghost that follows across years, attaching itself to every intimate bond. A woman may enter a relationship and unconsciously wait for the moment she will be cast aside, for the silence that will confirm the verdict of unworthiness. Even in tenderness, she braces for disappearance. This is the paradox. Her body longs for closeness, yet her nervous system has rehearsed abandonment so many times that even love feels unsafe. She may cling or she may withdraw, but at the core is the same unhealed wound of invisibility. You can observe how this plays out in patterns of attraction. She is often drawn to men who mirror the absence she once knew. Men who are distant, who withhold, who cannot truly see her. It is not masochism, it is repetition compulsion, the psyche's attempt to resolve an unfinished story by recreating it. If only this time she could be recognized, then perhaps the old shame would dissolve. But the cycle deepens, confirming the same wound she hoped to heal. This is why awareness is essential, for without awareness the unconscious directs the stage. Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Shame is one of the most potent examples of this law. It scripts choices, silences voices, and sculpts entire destinies while remaining hidden beneath the surface. To the outside world, she may appear competent, beautiful, charismatic. Yet within, the unseen child still trembles, waiting for someone to finally notice her essence. This is why external validation, no matter how abundant, often feels hollow. Praise cannot touch what shame has buried, because the wound is not about worth, it is about being unseen. Notice how even success does not always free her. She may achieve, she may dazzle, she may gather applause, and still the core whispers, "They do not truly see me." The mask is celebrated, but the essence remains hidden. And so shame survives even in triumph. This is the tragedy of the wound, it resists evidence. It cannot be argued away, only dissolved through a deeper recognition, one that comes not from others but from within. When the archetypal feminine turns her gaze inward and becomes her own witness, the alchemy begins. There is a moment when a woman looks into her own reflection and realizes that the parts she once buried in shame are not stains but seeds. The sensitivity she despised becomes the root of her intuition. The intensity she feared becomes the source of her passion. The silence she endured becomes the depth of her listening. Every fragment that shame labeled as defective is in truth a fragment of power, waiting to be integrated. The process of individuation is not about discarding the shadow, but embracing it, allowing light to fall on what was unseen. Imagine the shift when the inner voice no longer says, "I am wrong," but instead whispers, "I was unseen." The first sentence condemns identity, the second reveals circumstance, and circumstance can be transformed. This reframe breaks the fusion of shame with selfhood. You are not defective, you were overlooked. You are not unworthy, you were unrecognized. And once this truth penetrates, shame begins to loosen its grip, for its power was always rooted in confusion. Yet the path is not instantaneous. Shame resists exposure, it tightens when threatened. To walk through it requires not only insight but embodiment, the repeated practice of showing up, of speaking even when the voice shakes, of allowing others to see the parts once hidden. Each act of presence weakens the old script. Each act of visibility teaches the nervous system a new story. I can be seen and remain safe. This is the slow revolution of healing, the turning of fate into choice. And so the question lingers. What relationships, what desires, what hidden voices might finally come alive if shame were no longer the author of your destiny? Shame often disguises itself as virtue. It whispers that humility is safety, that smallness is grace, that silence is wisdom. Yet beneath these masks lies fear of exposure, the terror that being fully visible will invite rejection. Many women confuse this suppression with modesty. Not realizing it is the shadow of invisibility speaking. They learn to shrink so they will not be left, to soften so they will not be scorned, to disappear so they will not be abandoned. But the cost of survival is always the burial of essence. When you look closely, you see how shame shapes the body itself. Shoulders curve inward as if to protect the heart. The voice lowers as if to avoid offense. Even in a crowded room, the eyes drift downward, scanning for danger rather than claiming space. This is not conscious choice. It is conditioning etched into muscle and bone. The nervous system remembers what the mind has long tried to forget. Every gesture speaks. If I remain unseen, perhaps I will remain safe. The archetypal feminine carries immense power, yet shame convinces her that power is a liability. Desire becomes dangerous, ambition becomes arrogance, sensitivity becomes weakness. So she fragments herself, offering only the parts she thinks will be tolerated. But fragments cannot satisfy the soul. To live fragmented is to live half alive, forever chasing belonging but never tasting it. This is why relationships built on shame collapse. They are contracts of survival, not unions of essence. Consider how this dynamic unfolds in love. The woman who feels unseen may overgive, hoping that devotion will earn recognition. She may tolerate neglect, convincing herself that patience is loyalty. Or she may retreat into aloofness, protecting her heart by never fully offering it. Each of these patterns is a strategy to manage shame, not to resolve it. And as long as the strategy persists, the core wound remains untouched. The tragedy is that she believes she is unlovable, when in truth she has never revealed the fullness of herself to be loved. But there is a turning point. It comes in the moment she realizes that disappearing has not protected her. It has only perpetuated her exile. The silence she thought was safety is the same silence that sustains her wound. To heal is to risk visibility, to speak when the voice trembles, to stand even when the knees shake, to reveal even when rejection is possible. For only in exposure can shame dissolve, because shame cannot survive the light of witness. Jung described individuation as becoming who you truly are, not who the world told you to be. For the woman marked by shame, individuation means reclaiming every fragment once hidden. It is a sacred rebellion against invisibility, a refusal to keep erasing herself for the comfort of others. Each act of self-revelation becomes a ritual of liberation, a declaration that the unseen child will no longer be silenced. Imagine standing in a room and no longer folding yourself into the corners. Imagine speaking and hearing your own voice as steady and undeniable. Imagine being looked at and not shrinking but meeting the gaze with presence. These are not fantasies. They are the natural expressions of a psyche no longer ruled by shame. When the inner verdict is overturned, the body straightens, the voice strengthens, the eyes awaken. Life begins to move differently because the soul is no longer hiding from its own light. So ask yourself, if you no longer needed invisibility as protection, how boldly would your essence step into the world? There is a hidden cruelty in shame. It convinces the wounded one that her exile is self-chosen. She believes she is overlooked because she failed, because she is not enough, when in reality the failure belonged to those who could not see her. This confusion turns pain inward, transforming neglect into self-blame. And once shame has taken root, the woman polices herself more harshly than any outer judge ever could. She silences her laughter, edits her words, restrains her joy, all to avoid awakening the sentence she already carries within. You can notice how this inner tribunal shapes relationships. When a partner grows distant, shame does not ask what he is carrying. It concludes she is too much or not enough. When a friend forgets to call, shame whispers that she was never valued. When a door closes, shame insists it is proof of her defectiveness. In this way, neutral events become verdicts, and life becomes a courtroom where every gesture is evidence against her. It is exhausting to live as both defendant and executioner. The Stoics taught that the mind has power over interpretation. Yet when the wound of shame fuses with identity, interpretation no longer feels like choice. It feels like reality. This is why insight alone is not enough. The nervous system must be rewoven, The body must relearn safety and visibility. Otherwise, even wisdom sounds hollow, bouncing against the walls of an unchanged inner prison. Transformation begins when she interrupts the reflex, when she asks, "What if this silence does not mean rejection, but only silence? What if his withdrawal is his own shadow, not proof of mine?" This questioning cracks the spell. Each doubt she casts upon shame's certainty loosens its chains. Gradually, she sees that what once felt like destiny is only repetition. The partners who could not see her, the friends who forgot her, the spaces where she shrank, these were echoes of the first absence, not eternal truths. Once she recognizes the echo, she gains the power to end the pattern. The ghost of shame may linger, but it no longer dictates her choices. Here lies the paradox of healing. To be free of shame, she must walk through the vulnerability of exposure. It is not enough to think differently, she must live differently. She must show her desire without apology, voice her boundaries without trembling, let her presence be felt without disguise. Each act of revelation is frightening, yet each one proves the old verdict false. She discovers that visibility does not kill her, it awakens her. Archetypally, this is the passage of the hidden maiden into the sovereign woman. The figure who once lived in shadow emerges into her own throne, not by demanding recognition from others, but by bestowing it upon herself. The power is not in being chosen, but in choosing to be visible. And once this shift takes root, every relationship must change, for the invisible cannot be ignored once she stands in her full presence. Picture the moment, a conversation where she no longer rushes to soften her words, a meeting where she does not fold into the background, a lover's gaze she meets without lowering her eyes. Each small defiance of shame becomes a revolution. Each step into presence reshapes her fate. The woman who once begged to be seen begins to radiate in such a way that others cannot help but notice. Not because she chases recognition, but because she embodies it. So the question unfolds, What new world might open if you treated shame not as a verdict against your being, but as the signal that it is time to reveal the parts you once buried? The deeper truth is that shame thrives in secrecy. It grows strongest in the silence where words were never spoken and wounds were never named. Hidden away, it multiplies, until the woman believes that her entire self is contaminated by what must never be revealed. Yet the moment she speaks it into light, the spell begins to dissolve. Exposure does not destroy her. It destroys the illusion that she was alone in carrying it. For shame cannot survive community, nor can it withstand truth when truth is spoken with compassion. Consider how the psyche mirrors this process. Jung saw the shadow as the collection of everything we banish from consciousness, not because it is evil, but because it felt unacceptable. Shame, then, is the gatekeeper of the shadow. It says, "You cannot show this part or you will lose love." But when the woman dares to integrate what was hidden, her anger, her sensuality, her grief, she discovers that none of it was ever unworthy. What once felt monstrous reveals itself as power in disguise. The shadow does not corrupt her, it completes her. In relationships, this shift is seismic. Before, shame made her dependent on approval, desperately scanning for signs of acceptance. Now, with shadow integrated, she no longer negotiates her worth through another's gaze. She can love without begging. She can desire without apologizing. She can set boundaries without collapsing. The man who encounters her senses the difference. He feels the quiet power of a woman who is not asking permission to exist. And whether he chooses to rise to meet her or falls away, her worth remains untouched. The Stoics would call this the essence of freedom, the separation between what belongs to you and what belongs to fate. She cannot control whether others see her, but she can claim the choice to see herself. And in that act, shame loses its throne. For when she holds her gaze steady upon her own being, when she affirms her presence without condition, There is no external absence that can erase her. She becomes sovereign, even in solitude. But let us not romanticize the process. It is not instant, nor is it without tremor. Each time she steps into visibility, the old voice of shame will try to drag her back, warning that punishment is inevitable. The body will tense, the breath will shorten, the heart will race. This is not failure, this is the body remembering its exile. With patience and courage, she can teach it a new story, breathing through the panic, grounding in the present, reminding herself, I am safe to be seen now. What was dangerous then is survivable now. And slowly, something extraordinary unfolds. The very places where she once felt most ashamed, her sensitivity, her intensity, her depth, become the sources of her magnetism. What others once dismissed as too much becomes the reason she cannot be ignored. The woman who was unseen becomes unforgettable, not because she performs for recognition, but because she embodies the fullness of her own being. The shadowed flame that once flickered in secrecy now blazes in sovereign light. So pause and consider, what part of yourself have you most feared to reveal? And what if that very part is the key to the power you were searching for all along? There is a paradox hidden at the heart of shame. The very thing it convinces you to conceal is often the very thing that others long to feel from you. Vulnerability, when unmasked, carries a resonance that cannot be faked. It is why a trembling voice can move us more than flawless performance, why a tear can awaken more connection than endless charm. Shame whispers that your cracks will destroy you, yet it is through those cracks that light and intimacy enter. The soul does not seek perfection, it seeks truth. When a woman begins to understand this, she no longer spends her life curating an image that earns safety. She realizes that the masks she crafted to avoid shame have become cages that suffocate her. The polished smile, the silence in moments of conflict, the desperate attempts to always be pleasing, these were survival strategies, but they were not life. When she dares to drop them, even trembling, she breathes for the first time in years. Others may recoil, but those who are meant to see her will finally recognize her. In Jungian language, this is the beginning of individuation, the slow, courageous process of becoming whole rather than merely good. To become whole, a woman must reclaim the pieces of herself she exiled in order to belong. She must learn to hold both her tenderness and her fury, her wisdom and her desire, her clarity and her confusion. Wholeness is not a polished statue. It is a living tapestry woven of contradictions, stitched together by compassion. Shame taught her that only fragments were acceptable, but wholeness reveals that all of it was always hers to carry. And here lies the challenge. To stand in wholeness means risking rejection. Not everyone will welcome the unveiled self. Some will try to shame her again, to push her back into silence. Yet she learns to stand in her truth anyway, because sovereignty is not measured by universal approval but by inner alignment. The more she practices this, the less fragile she becomes. She no longer asks, will they love me if they see this? Instead she asks, can I still love myself if they do? That question, answered with courage, dismantles shame at its roots. The Stoics remind us that no insult can wound without our consent, that our interpretation grants power to words. This does not mean numbness, it means sovereignty. The woman learns to feel the sting of judgment without collapsing beneath it. She can let others speak, and she can let their words fall to the ground rather than into her bloodstream. Like a flame behind glass, she remains lit regardless of the storm outside. Shame once dictated her worth. Now her worth dictates her response to shame. Over time, a new kind of magnetism emerges. Others sense that she cannot be manipulated by fear of exclusion. They realize she will not betray herself to remain in someone else's circle. This does not make her cold, it makes her luminous. Her presence says, I am not for sale, I am not for exile, I am already home in myself. And paradoxically, this is what draws people closer, not her desperation for connection, but her rootedness in selfhood. Imagine for a moment what it would mean if the part of you that once carried the most shame became the center of your strength. How would your relationships shift, your choices transform, your voice sound, if the wound you hid became the well you drew power from? There is a sacred reversal that happens when shame loses its grip. The wound no longer defines you as broken, but becomes the mark of your survival. It is not the absence of scars that makes someone radiant, but the ability to carry them without apology. The woman who once trembled under the gaze of others begins to recognize that her scars are not stains but inscriptions, proof that she has lived, endured, and risen. What once silenced her now becomes her language of power. This transformation is not loud or theatrical. It is subtle, like a flame that refuses to go out no matter how many times the wind tries to snuff it. There is no longer a frantic need to explain, justify, or beg for acceptance. Instead, there is a groundedness that others cannot quite name. They feel it in the way she walks into a room without shrinking, in the way she holds silence without fear, in the way her eyes meet theirs without apology. It is the quiet power of a woman who has stopped abandoning herself. In Jungian terms, this is the integration of the shadow. The parts of her that once seemed dangerous, her anger, her sensuality, her hunger for freedom, are no longer locked away in the basement of her psyche. She has walked down those dark steps, faced what was hidden, and returned carrying gifts. Every shadow reclaimed expands her wholeness. Every exiled part embraced restores her sovereignty. She learns that the shadow is not an enemy but a reservoir of vitality, and without it, she cannot be complete. Yet shame will still try to whisper from time to time. It will try to resurrect the old fear, that if she shows too much, she will be too much. That if she speaks her truth, she will lose what she loves. But something has shifted. She now recognizes shame's voice as an echo from the past, not a prophecy of the future. The old narrative loses its authority because she has lived through rejection and survived it. She has spoken her truth and discovered she can bear the consequences. What once felt fatal now feels like freedom. The Stoics would say that true strength lies not in controlling what others think, but in controlling what you choose to honor within yourself. No insult, no judgment, no exile can alter the essence of your worth. The only power others hold is the power you give them. When a woman lives from this truth, she is no longer chained to external validation. She can lose approval and remain whole. She can face disapproval and remain steady. She can be seen in her fullness and remain radiant. And with this shift comes a new form of intimacy. When you no longer hide, connection becomes authentic. Relationships deepen because they are no longer built on masks but on essence. Some people will leave because they preferred the mask, not the soul. But those who stay, those who enter, will recognize the rare gift of being with someone who is not divided within herself. She is no longer seeking mirrors to validate her worth. She is simply being, and in that being, others find refuge. The paradox is complete. The very qualities she once buried in shame are the qualities that now make her magnetic. Her softness that was once dismissed as weakness becomes. Her depth, her intensity that was once labeled too much becomes her fire. Her boundaries that were once feared as rejection become her sacredness. Shame tried to erase her, but in resisting it, she became more fully herself. And so the lingering question remains, pressing at the edge of your awareness. If shame could no longer silence you, if its grip dissolved in this very moment, what truth within you would finally rise to the surface? That truth, once released, would not arrive as a shout but as a quiet inevitability. It would rise from the depths of your being like water breaking through stone, slow at first, then unstoppable. The moment it surfaces, you would feel the weight of decades dissolve, for the burden of hiding is heavier than the burden of living. What has been silenced, once spoken, reorders the ground beneath your feet. You do not become someone new. You return to who you were before shame rewrote your story. In that return lies sovereignty. Sovereignty is not domination, nor is it detachment. It is the refusal to be owned by forces outside yourself. It is the moment you choose to live aligned with what is true, no matter who resists it, no matter what is lost in the process. Jung called this individuation, the becoming of a whole and undivided self. To individuate is to risk everything that was built on pleasing, masking, and performing. It is to step away from borrowed identities and into the terrifying clarity of your own. At first, this feels like death. Relationships fracture, familiar roles fall away. Even your own reflection may seem foreign, as though you are shedding layers of skin that no longer fit. But with every layer that falls, your breath deepens, your voice steadies, your steps become less frantic. You begin to realize that what is dying is not you, but the false self that shame demanded you carry. And in its place emerges a woman unburdened, a woman whole. The high priestess within you, that ancient archetype of hidden wisdom, awakens in this moment. She does not rush. She does not beg. She knows that power without grounding burns itself out, but power rooted in truth is inexhaustible. Her gaze is steady because it does not seek approval. Her silence is potent because it is not filled with fear. She knows that to stand sovereign is not to stand above others, but to stand in yourself, untouchable and whole. There will always be those who do not understand this kind of strength. Some will call it coldness, others arrogance. But what they do not see is that your strength was forged not in comfort, but in the furnace of shame. Every rejection, every dismissal, every silence you endured carved out the space for this depth. You are not unfeeling. You are no longer at the mercy of feelings that once imprisoned you. Your boundaries are not walls to keep others out. They are the gates through which only the worthy may enter. And yet, sovereignty is not isolation. It is the foundation of authentic union. Only when you no longer abandon yourself can you truly connect without fear. Only when you no longer chase can you truly choose. This is the paradox that shame tried to hide, that your deepest intimacy is born not from submission but from self-possession. When you belong to yourself, the love you offer is no longer desperate. It is sacred. It is free. So the cycle closes. What began as shame ends as radiance. What once silenced you now speaks through you. What once threatened to erase you now testifies to your becoming. And the question remains, echoing softly in the chambers of your being. Will you allow the truth you carry to remain hidden, or will you finally let it rise, unashamed, unbound, undeniable?